On the final day of the regular season, the New York Mets had a chance to keep their playoff hopes alive. They went out with a whimper. 4-0 loss to the Marlins, and just like that, $340 million roster filled with big names and big expectations ends with no October baseball, no comebacks all season, 0 wins when trailing after the 8th inning. Pete Alonso opting out. A fan base is angry, they are embarrassed, and they're asking the same question. How did it all go so wrong? This week, we're breaking down another epic collapse, what it means for the Mets' future, and why this team simply didn't deserve October baseball. On this week's Dugout Discussions, we've got to talk about it. The Mets, they were officially eliminated from playoff contention after a 4-0 loss to the Marlins on the final day of the regular season. A year that started with sky-high expectations and a $340 million payroll ends with one of the most frustrating collapses in recent memory. To help us break it all down, when we look at what went wrong, who's to blame, where this team goes from here, we're going to talk about it with my guy from ESPN New York Radio. He is a host there. His name is Tyriq Butler, and he joins me now. Ty, what's going on, man? Oh, you laughing?
Listen,
oh no, that could be good or bad. I don't know.
Listen, the last thing that I expected when I saw Juan Soto sign, I got the notification. It was actually during a Sunday night football game. I saw Juan Soto sign the biggest contract in franchise history and baseball history with the Mets. The last thing I expected was for us to be 9 months later talking about not how this team didn't win a World Series, didn't make the World Series, didn't make the playoffs altogether. So that's why I'm laughing here, man. That's why I'm laughing. What an embarrassment.
No, embarrassment is the right word. It is fair. If you'd have told me this 9 months ago, I would have said, that's crazy. And this is crazy. This is why we got to talk about it. All this is crazy. And Ty, the Mets finished the season, as I just mentioned, with a 4-0 loss to the Marlins. All they had to do was win. The Reds, they lost their game, right? And the Mets were eliminated from playoff contention on the final day. This was a slow burn of a collapse. So how do you sum this up? Please do it for me. Do it for the people. How do you sum this up?
I sum it up this way. We ignored all the signs. The Mets, since June 13th, had been hemorrhaging. They were 38-55, so a touch better than some of the worst teams in baseball. And we just thought that, they'll get healthier, they'll play better. We saw all the signs, and yet we ignored it because we were seduced by the talent on this roster. How could a team with Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor somehow miss the playoffs when all that was required was for you to win 84 games? So let's talk about what went wrong. They had just one guy in their rotation that come the late stretch of the season they could trust. And that one guy was a dude who was called up about, 5 weeks ago, Nolan McLean, who, by the way, was awesome, was electrifying, but should not be the only guy in this rotation you can trust. So that's a problem. Your rotation was an abject disaster. The general manager of this team decided that, our prized acquisition coming into the season for that rotation was going to be Frankie Montas. How'd that work out? And upon seeing how those results had what netted them over the first couple months of the season, got to the trade deadline and said, we're going to sit this one out. We've got it. Yeah, we've got the horses. David Peterson, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, that entire rotation was an abomination, and that's why the Mets sit here where they are. And it's also why it's perfect, because coming into today, they needed help. They needed the Brewers to, win the game against the Reds. And Cincinnati goes up 2-0. You're thinking it's just not meant to be. Milwaukee helps the Mets. It was right there for the Mets. They controlled their own destiny. And they didn't just lose. Dexter, they got shut out.
Shut out. And listen, with all that happening, they get the help from Milwaukee. We've seen this movie before. This was the most Mets kind of ending ever. Like, there's no Mets fan that could argue that with me. This was the most Mets kind of ending ever. I love the words you used. You're right. We saw all the red flags, right? They were waving the red flags the whole time through the season. And you're right, we were seduced by the talent on the roster. The $340 million roster that couldn't get to October baseball, right? We know this. Mets fans, they've been through collapses before. But my question here for you would be, we know about 2007. We know about 2008. But does this one cut a little bit deeper for the Mets fan because of the money invested, because of the hype surrounding this team heading into this season? Does this one cut deeper for the Mets fan?
Oh, it's way worse. It is the biggest collapse in New York sports history. It also is worse because, in addition to the things that you mentioned, high payroll, $340 million, you're coming off of an NLCS appearance against the Dodgers where they were actually competitive. They took them to 6 games. You added Juan Soto, but here's the best part: in 2007 and in 2008, there was no third wild card team. So the Mets had another opportunity to get in. Even after we learned the Phillies were better and the Cubs were better, you still had an opportunity to get the third and final wild card spot. When the Giants decided at the deadline they were punting, when the Diamondbacks decided they were punting, and the Reds, this young fun team, still on the final day of the season, showed you they weren't ready for prime time because all Cincinnati had to do was win and get in against a Brewers team with not a lot of motivation to win this game because they're locked and loaded, set for the division series to begin. The Mets, all they had to do was win one game to become the third wild card team, and they couldn't do it. So, yes, it does cut a little deeper when you look at everything that was baked into this equation.
Yeah, Mets fans seen this before. They know about just having to win one game and then not getting. Again, like I said, we've seen this movie before. We've seen this movie before.
But not with Juan Soto.
No,
This is
that's
different.
fair.
You,
I
you
think that.
added
Yep.
you added a guy who just last season finished third in the American League MVP. And y'all have been and Met fans have been fawning over Juan Soto for a year now. And you also it just gets funnier the more I think about it. You
Except
also
it's not
have
funny to Mets fans at all. None of
you
this. I'm
also
laughing, but none of this is funny to Mets fans. You know
and
this.
some of the Met fans are gonna have to
You
laugh
got to
to
laugh
stop
to stop
themselves
from
from
crying.
crying.
Mm-hmm.
What did Steve Cohen say? He was building the Dodgers of the East. Well, every time I turn around, the Dodgers are in the World Series. The Mets didn't even make the playoffs. They did not make the playoffs. And there will be time to dissect going forward what needs to happen. But all this comes down to is you had one game to win against the Miami Marlins, and the Mets, with that loaded lineup, scored a grand total of 0 runs, just as many runs as Dexter, you and I scored today.
Yep. And I didn't even have to step up to the plate. I didn't have to do
Exactly.
that. I didn't have to do that at all. So when we look at this tie, how much of this, because you know how this goes. We've been doing this for quite some time. People always have to play the blame game in some sort of way. And I'm always careful about doing this, but I have to ask this question. How much of this falls on David Stearns in the front office, and how much of this falls on Carlos Mendoza and the coaching staff? Because these are the first couple of places that fans in particular are going to look. So which one is it?
So I think ultimately, when you have a collapse that will be talked about for ages, it's going to fall on everyone. And Mendoza, the manager, certainly didn't have his best season, but he was not armed with enough ammunition to navigate through a year where every single night you had a starting pitcher where you just did not have confidence was going to be able to get you through it. And remember, earlier this month, Kodai Senga, who was supposed to be the team's ace, was sent down to AAA because they had to figure out what was going on with him. Prior to him getting hurt on June 13th, he had an ERA in the ones. The Mets were 21 games over 500. They had the best record in baseball. So it fell apart. And again, some of that has to fall on Mendoza. But when David Stearns shows up to Steve Cohen and is having an honest conversation about what went wrong for the 2025 Mets, it starts and ends with him and the players. Yes, you got to blame the players. They've got to perform. I understand that. But when you are bad for 3 straight months and the general manager had a trade deadline to try to resolve some of these issues, and Cedric Mullins, I mean, that's the best you can come up with, didn't do enough. And Ryan Helsley, who was awful, when you've got a trade deadline to fix things, maybe we could say Nolan McLean should have been called up sooner. There is a lot we could lay at the altar of David Stearns, who comes in highly respected, highly regarded. But this is going to be one that if I'm Steve Cohen, I'm not firing the manager or the general manager, but I'm looking at David Stearns like, my man, I gave you $340 million to play with, and we didn't make the playoffs.
That's fair. That's fair. Owner's going to want some return on his investment. Can't be mad if Steve Cohen is feeling some kind of way about the money that he's shelling out and didn't make the playoffs. Can't be mad at that at all. When you look at this roster, though, Ty, was there a chemistry or camaraderie element that was missing from the team this year? Because you heard so much comparison early in the year. Last year, you had the OMG vibes or the Grimace vibes, even though I don't think Grimace had anything to do with it. There was just so much of that there, or is it just simple as the players just not performing? Is it the camaraderie, chemistry, or just players didn't get it done?
I think that it's hard to really argue chemistry and camaraderie in baseball. Like if this were the NBA or the NFL, yes, to an extent. Like AJ Brown's putting up subtweets in a game that the Eagles won. Right, they're 4-0, so there are some chemistry issues that exist in other sports that I don't think pertain to baseball. It's easy to make that case when the team is not winning. Like we can do the OMG and have our fancy little handshakes when the team is winning, but when you finish the season 7-14, it's going to be hard for anyone to get excited. I just think it comes down to the players not performing to their expectations. What happened to Mark Vientos this year? I mean, Francisco Alvarez just an up and down season between the injuries, being sent down. Like there were too many players the Mets depended on that just did not live up to expectations. And when you have a season like this, it starts to the pressure starts to mount and it starts to get to you. That's why everyone's not made for moments like this. And I saw in that game today, it looked like the Mets. Pete Alonso had that shot he hit to the outfield. At that moment, you saw in his face that was my chance, man, and we just didn't get it done.
Yeah, I said to some people watching the game here, I thought that was the Mets' biggest at bat of the season, and we obviously saw how that ended. Pete Alonso did not come through. He did not perform when needed to be. Granted, he hit the ball really hard. I think it was 116 miles per hour off the bat, but nobody's going to care about that 116 miles per hour off the bat when it leads to an out. Now, speaking of not performing, struggling to produce with runners in scoring position. That was a problem all season long for most guys in this lineup. How do the Mets address that this offseason?
I just think that you have to get better around your stars. We know Soto and Lindor aren't going anywhere. And I think this also adds some pressure on them to bring back Pete Alonso. Like, what's the case you make for getting better with hitting with runners in scoring position that includes getting rid of your most prolific home run hitter? I think Pete has, because of the season we just saw, made a strong case. The Mets got to bring him back. And it was interesting after the win on Saturday, where he obviously had major contributions, hit the home run. He talked about how he's wearing Lindor's eye black, he's wearing Soto's socks. Like there was a chemistry between those three guys, and I think that's a trio you got to keep together. But around them, there needs to be some improvement. I don't know how you're gonna find Brandon Nimmo. Like that's a contract I would look to get rid of, but I just don't know if any team's taking that. Center field. Like, do you feel comfortable with the production you're getting from center field? So Brett Beatty's got to be your third baseman. What are you doing with Mark Vientos? Jeff McNeil did not have a good year this year. Francisco Alvarez, as I mentioned, he dealt with a plethora of issues. So I think figuring out how to put players around your three guys that can just get on base consistently, even if they're not hitting for power, will go a long way into helping this team. And I would bring back Pete Alonso.
All right, so you bring back Pete Alonso. We're going to get back to Pete Alonso in a second, but the Amazings, they were anything but amazing late, right? And one of the eye-popping stats that I think I will always remember from this 2025 season is that the Mets ended the season 0-70 tie when trailing after the 8th inning. My question here is, why did this team struggle to come back in situations like that? And what is a potential solution to this weakness? Is it something you mentioned before and just cleaning up things on the edges, the players around their core, which is getting guys on base, but even some of those guys didn't hit when it counted in the clutch. So what's the solution to getting some late inning wins, which the Mets were not able to do all season long?
And by the way, 0-70, which is a stark contrast to what we saw last year. Like
Total opposite.
This team last year, you could never count them out of a game because, they were always in it. They always gave you this belief that regardless of what the score was, we were going to, at the very least, bring the tie and run to the plate. Like that was going to happen, which is something we did not see from this team. And I think it comes down to I'm sorry to keep harping on this, but if you're losing in abundance the way the Mets they had for the last 3 months, it starts to affect your confidence. Guys start pressing at the plate. It's not basketball where you can play harder or football where you can hit harder. You start pressing, and I think that alters your confidence to the point where the Mets in these games were just waiting for the other shoe to drop. They would get out to big leads, bullpen would blow it, and it's like, here we go again. Every single time, all it took was one thing to misfire, and the Mets were just imploding. They've lost games where extra innings. They've got the bases loaded, one out. Like, how are you losing games like this? How are you losing games? You can go through, and Met fans will do this. You can comb through all of the should have been wins games, and all you have to do is flip the outcome of one of them, and you make the playoffs. So I think year to year, these things can change. I don't know if there's something specific that they have to do to address that. But when you start losing, man, sports it's all or a lot of sports is psychological and it's mental. That just starts to affect with your psyche, and I think it's what led to the Mets having that like defeated spirit once they entered these late games and just couldn't come back.
Yeah, 0-70. That is a wild stat. Just a wild
Crazy.
stat there. Now, clearly, there will be changes to the roster, right? We know this. There's going to be some changes. If the Mets are making a shopping list right now, when you look at this time, you're shopping, what items must they have on the list for this offseason?
I mean, everything is going to tie back to the starting rotation in the bullpen. But here's the interesting thing, because you immediately think, all right, we got to get some starters. But you have one in Nolan McLean. He's a lock to be in your rotation next year. Kodai Senga has shown you in spurts he could be really good. So he's going to be a part of that rotation. Now, he gets demoted. He's not your ace, but he should be able to come back uh, from a hamstring injury this year, sit down to AAA, and figure out a way to be in that rotation somehow. Clay Holmes ends up being a success story. Now, he was a part of a rotation that was a disaster, so he kind of gets swallowed up in that. But when you look at Clay Holmes, top 10 in ERA, his transition from being a reliever to a starter, I thought was successful. And now you're looking at guys like Tong and Sproat, because they got that big league experience. I don't think you start them in the minors next year. You let them be all systems go. So that's the shopping list, adding some bullpen pieces, and then figuring out what's going on at third base, what's going on at center field, and also what's going to happen for you at catcher. Like, is Francisco Alvarez your catcher going forward? I think he's shown enough promise, but between the injuries and him being sent down, I guess you can excuse it. You have to get consistency from places not named Lindor, Soto, and Alonso, assuming he comes back.
Absolutely got to get it. You just mentioned Alonso, and then I want to get to the young pitcher, something you mentioned about them, because Alonso said right after game 162 that he would be opting out of his contract and testing free agency. I mean, I think many of us expected that, especially with him being a Scott Boras client. But how much pressure do you think there's now on David Stearns and Steve Cohen to keep the Mets' all-time home run leader in Flushing long-term? I know you're saying they have to bring him back, but there's going to be pressure too, and he might feel like he has a little bit of leverage here. So they got to get this done, right? And what price point are you willing to go to for Pete Alonso?
Oh, he is certainly operating at a place with more leverage than he did last year. And last year, he had a down season, but obviously hit that big home run in the playoffs off of Devin Williams. So it kind of, sparked his price point a bit. But 38 home runs, 126 RBIs, OPS of 871, hit for, a pretty decent average at 272. He can he can tell the Mets, here's what I want. If you don't give this to me, I'm out. I don't know that he's going to get a long-term deal, and he's certainly not going to get the deal that he wanted last year. A year older, he's a first baseman. We saw this year still not great defensively, so there are some flaws with his game. But I think he's most valuable to the Mets. He's not their captain, but he's one of the leaders on the team. And there is something to him setting the franchise record for home runs overall. Like there's a spirit, there's an energy, there is just a certain ambiance that is provided when you have Pete Alonso being a part of the culture of this team. And look, David Stearns showed you in Milwaukee he can put great regular season teams together, but he still has a lot that has to be desired when it comes to postseason success. So as far as Pete Alonso's price point, it's not going to be what it was last year, but it certainly is going to be better from a leverage standpoint with him entering the negotiations than it was a season ago.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how those negotiations go this offseason. Okay, you mentioned this before where you were talking about the pitching rotation, and you said, look, Nolan McLean got to be in the rotation next season. And you also mentioned that you think Brandon Sproat and Jonah Tong should be in the rotation next season. 'Cause I was going to ask you where you thought they should be at. Should they be in Queens? Should they be in Syracuse? It looks like you believe that all of them can contribute looking ahead to next year and the next couple of years beyond that. And that's what Mets fans would like. Is it fair to trust three young pitchers that do have some upside in this rotation next season? Is that too much for the Mets to do, to bank on those three pitchers along with Kodai Senga? And I agree with you. I think Clay Holmes was a success. I'm with you on that. I rock with that. But they're going to go with those young pitchers. Should they do that or look for maybe a more established veteran? I don't know who that person is. Maybe trading for Sandy Alcantara. You think they should rock with the young kids going forward? I mean, I guess part of your point is, Ty, tell me if I'm wrong, it can't be worse than what they had this year.
Yeah, it can't be worse, but there's also pressure for Stearns to deliver in this regard. We know why the Mets did not make the playoffs this year, and it's directly related to something he did not do. It was a requirement he did not fulfill, it was an obligation he did not meet, and that was getting some experienced guys who could actually do the job. So, as far as the young pitchers, I mean, there is benefit. And that's why you love what Nolan McLean did. That dude came up here in the highest of pressurized situations and delivered. It's not his fault the Mets missed the playoffs. In fact, the Mets would not have even made it to the final day of the regular season with playoff implications had it not been for Nolan McLean. Now, Sproat and Tong obviously were not as good as he was, and you could argue there were some limitations there that got exposed. But I think the true benefit for having them being thrust into a playoff, because these were playoff games for the Mets essentially. The last 21 games, now they went 7-14. These were playoff games, so it's like an audition for these young guys. I think they have to be in the running to be part of this rotation. And in addition to that, Stearns has got to go out there and grab some established vets who you can count on, because I just don't look at the guys that they have here and say, yeah, let's just roll with them next year.
Yeah, I don't see it either. It's going to be very interesting to see what do they do with Sean Manaea. He's got the loose bodies in his elbow. What do they do with him? Are they all in the kids? Listen, I've been all about being all in the kids. I think regardless of how you feel as a Mets fan, I think the one thing they did good down the stretch, they didn't win enough down the stretch, Ty, but they did bring these kids up. And I love what you said. They put them in pressurized situations, put them to pitch in big games, and it could be huge for the development going forward. And at least now, I feel the same as you. You know what, it looks like you know what you have in Nolan McLean. He looks like a guy you could pencil into your rotation for the start of 2026. Last thing for me, Ty, look, we know the Mets fans are hurting right now. They're down
Are
bad.
they?
That's probably an understatement. They are down bad right
Man.
now. But how much damage did this season do to the trust, if Mets fans had any left, that the fan base has in the front office's big plan? Because this is what we heard. You mentioned this before from David Stearns and Steve Cohen. They want to make this Dodgers East. They wanted to develop that kind of team. Right now, it feels like they're far off from that. How did this season damage the trust Mets fans have? And then I guess from you is the other part I'd have is, what's your message to Mets fans right now? How should they view this season and the road ahead? Should there be any optimism?
Did it do damage to the trust that the Met fans had with this regime? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you were sold. If we go back to when Steve Cohen first got here, there was this like promise that they were going to win a championship in the first 5 years. Now, that didn't happen. They didn't acquire Juan Soto, and it felt like they were primed for takeoff. And the Mets, I mentioned this again, despite Soto struggling earlier in the season, were 45-24. But something happened on June 13th. Kodai Senga goes down with an injury. They, from that point on, go 38-55. Should your season sour the way that it did because Kodai Senga had a hamstring injury? Should that cause you to go from being the best record, having the best record in baseball, to 17 games under 500 the rest of the way? Absolutely not. Especially missing the playoffs when you get not one, not two, but three wild card spots. So should the Met fan feel betrayed? Should they feel a lack of trust in this regime? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because David Stearns, as brilliant as he was with Milwaukee, they had the sixth highest win percentage during his tenure there. They never won anything. And these Met fans are starving to win something. So yes, you come in here with a resume that validates you can put together a regular season winner, which by the way you didn't do this year, but it's about winning championships, and they haven't done that. My message to the Met fans is: look, there's no positive way to spin this. Let's not have, people on here come talk to you and say, well, this and that happened. No, you missed the playoffs in a season where you were expected to win a championship. You're going to have to regroup. There's still tremendous talent on this roster. And I think you got to hope and pray that Pete Alonso finds himself back in Flushing, because if you lose him, I think this thing gets a lot worse. Now, maybe not worse as far as missing the playoffs, but I just don't see how you get closer to winning a championship that does not involve Pete Alonso being on this team in that lineup with Lindor and with Soto. But it's tough, man. It's tough. It is going to be a brutal, brutal couple of months for the Mets, especially if the Yankees go on to win the World Series.
Yeah.
That's gonna be
You
rough.
don't have to. We don't got to do that to the people. That's
That's
what you call throwing a little salt on the wound. You know what I mean?
I
You
mean,
you don't have to do that to the people. You're throwing a little
it,
salt on the
it
wound. That
but
that
but
that would just make it worse. Cause listen,
but you,
you know there's some Yankee fans out there on the other side that are
celebrating.
doing a little grave dancing right now. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? They're doing a
absolutely.
little grave dancing.
Well, especially because there were people talking about this was a Met town. Like those were conversations being had out loud. So of course there are Yankee fans dancing on the grave of Met fans. So Lindor, Soto, Alonso combined for 112 home runs, and I get this from Jared Diamond. 112 home runs, 324 runs scored, 317 RBIs, and the Mets missed the playoffs. How do you get that production from this trio and miss the playoffs? My message to Met fans is it's only, I'm sorry, but the emotions as we progress through these stages of grief, will only get worse. But, there's always next season.
Yeah, except the fans say that a lot. The Mets fans coming at you to like, Ty, we've said there's always next year. You got to believe next year. They're tired of saying that time and time again. They don't want to say that anymore. What you got?
You know what makes it worse, too?
Yeah?
This was your time to capitalize. Because guess who had a down year? The Atlanta Braves. They were, dealing with injuries. They were awful this year. Still beat you, but they were awful this year. So you couldn't even take advantage of 3 wild cards. Couldn't take advantage of in your division having the Braves. The Braves have a down year, and of course you got to deal with the Phillies. But think about that for a moment.
No?
How terrible that is.
No, you're right. Listen, I think one other thing I want to hit before we leave here, this discussion, I think you've made repeated mention of David Stearns and what he's done in Milwaukee. And it makes me think all the time. It's like, yeah, you were in Milwaukee. You had the 6th highest winning percentage in baseball during the time. And Ty, you're absolutely right. He has not won anything in that time. And it's kind of like, in The Wizard of Oz, what did Dorothy say to Toto? We're not in Kansas anymore. David Stearns is not in Milwaukee anymore. This is New York City. And the expectations are a little different. You were right about the Mets fan base being starved. And I think the E word you used at the top of this conversation, it's embarrassing. There's no doubt about it. You can't put a positive spin on it. It's a $340 million embarrassment. No ifs,
and
no ands, buts about it.
Think about this, Dexter. And I know we got to go.
Yep.
But think about the New York teams over the last half decade that we've seen completely flop. The Brooklyn Nets, right? That was a disaster. They made the playoffs in back-to-back years. They won a playoff series. They were KD's, foot size being a little smaller away from being in the conference finals. So, yes, we can poke fun at Durant, Harden, and Irvin and how big of a flop that was, but they made the playoffs and won a playoff round. The New York Jets, a couple seasons ago, what an embarrassment that was. Super Bowl aspirations. Yeah, right. But the reason why they never reached their fullest expectations was because their quarterback got hurt in the first game of the season. There's something we can directly point to with the Jets, with Aaron Rodgers, and with the Nets, with the injuries that they had in the COVID stuff. With the Mets, there's no excuse for this. You went 7-14 in your last. On September, it just keeps coming to me. On September 5th. So what's that? 23 days ago, they had a 6-game lead over the Reds. 23 days ago, they were up 6 games on the Reds. Come on, man.
Hey, sometimes it was all good just a week ago. Sometimes it was all good just 23 days ago. Right now, it is not good for the Mets fan after this 2025 season. That is my guy, Tyriq Butler. Check out Ty Butler on ESPN New York Radio. Also check out, there's a great live YouTube show. I've been on it a couple of times, the Ty Butler Show. Please check that out as well, too. Ty, I told you this season I was going to have you come on and talk to Mets. I thought we were saving you for this week and we were going to do a playoff preview. But instead, it feels like a funeral. That's what it feels like for the Mets here. That's what we ended up doing. Next year I'll have you on hopefully in happier times. Next season or through the off season. Maybe when there's some happier times. Maybe we do.
Maybe they'll sign another big free agent to a big time contract and win the offseason again.
Winning the offseason. That's what everybody wants. The Mets fans want to happen. They want to win the offseason. They would like to have been in the playoffs, but that didn't happen. Thank you, Ty. I appreciate you, man. Okay, Mets fans, here we go. Deserve doesn't always have anything to do with it. You earn October baseball by executing, by showing up in the big moments and doing the little things right. And let's be real, this Mets team didn't do that in 2025. This was a $340 million roster. Talent was there. Name value was there. But execution, non-existent. Time and time again, this team failed with runners in scoring position, failed in late game situations, failed to deliver when the moment called for it. How about this stat that I mentioned before? The Mets went 0-70 when trailing after the 8th inning. That's 0 comebacks, none. And if that doesn't tell you everything about this team's lack of fight and ability to execute late, well, I don't know what does. And look, it's easy to point the finger at David Stearns, at Carlos Mendoza, at the front office. But at the end of the day, players have agency. They're the ones in the box. They're the ones on the mound. This team had enough talent to win. They just didn't get it done. Now Pete Alonso, he's opting out. Questions surround the core. But none of that changes the fact that this group, as it was built, failed. They didn't deserve October because they didn't play like an October team. So, where does that leave them? A lot of work to do. Chemistry to build, holes to fill, a culture to reset. Because 2026 can't just be about talent on paper. It has to be about execution between the lines. Mets fans, they expect a winner. The front office spent for a winner. The players, they didn't deliver a winner. And until they do, deserve? Well, it's got nothing to do with it. That's going to do it for this edition of Straight Outta Flushing. Special thanks to the people that make this show look great and have been doing that all season long. Producer Erica Block, associate producer Nick Federico, production assistants Tommy Cohen and Jessica Thiessen, and editor Eduardo Guerrero. We're going to be bringing you much more throughout the offseason here on Straight Outta Flushing. We'll continue to do that, so stick with us. We'll catch you next time on another edition of Straight Outta Flushing.